The book of Job deals with one of the most basic questions in human existence. Why do good people suffer evil things? To explore this question, the writer of Job sets up a dramatic plot. Job's faith is literally put on trial. God praises Job as a righteous and faithful servant, but like a good prosecuting attorney, the adversary challenges Job's motives. Does Job's faithfulness and devotion to God depend on the good fortune and success he has enjoyed? What will happen, the adversary asks, when Job's faith is put to the test by losing everything he holds dear? Confident of Job's steadfastness, God allows the adversary to test Job by taking away his health and his wealth and his family. By examining how Job responds to his friends and to God in the face of his suffering, Mark Price will help us see how the writer of Job views righteousness, suffering, and the sovereignty of God.
Why did I not die at birth, come forth from the womb and expire? What is my strength that I should wait? What is my end that I should be patient? I loathe my life. I will give free utterance to my complaint. I will say to God, do not condemn me. Let me know why you contend against me. Your hands fashioned and made me, and now you turn and destroy me. Why did you bring me forth from the womb? These are the words of Job, one of the most memorable and troubling characters in all of the Bible, in all of world literature for that matter. But are these the words most often associated with Job? And does this art really portray the image of Job that first comes to mind? Look and listen again. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Now that's more like it. Job the pious, Job the patient, Job the cliché, Job the man of chapters 1 and 2. A study of the book of Job presents a number of challenges, not the least of which is how to reconcile the compliant Job of the prologue with the complaining Job of the dialogues. A similar challenge is what to make of the complex depiction of God in the story. In the narrative sections in chapters 1 and 2 and 42, 7 through 17, God comes across as a kind of capricious deity, bestowing curse and blessing at will. In the poetic speeches in chapters 38 through 41, God speaks with power and immediacy. Then there's the question of how to understand the role of Hasatan, the Satan, God's district attorney who sets the story in motion and then is not mentioned again. There are also challenges within the text itself. The book of Job contains often sophisticated and ambiguous poetic language and more one-of-a-kind words than any other book in the Hebrew Bible, making it one of the most difficult to translate. Scholars continue to debate a host of textual ambiguities, many dealing with the book's structure. The book begins and ends with a prose narrative, written with the feel of an ancient folk tale. A long poem stands in between, written as a conversation between Job and three friends. This conversation follows a cyclical pattern. Each friend addresses Job, and Job responds to each friend in turn, until a new character, Elihu, appears with lots to say. Unlike the dialogues between Job and his friends, Elihu's speech is a monologue, seen by some as summarizing the arguments of the other three or as setting the stage for what follows. A text belonging to the Old Testament pseudepigrapha entitled The Testament of Job went so far as to describe the words of Elihu as inspired by Satan. Finally, God speaks to Job out of the whirlwind, and the poetry ends with a last word from Job. Questions abound. How did the book's distinct prose and poetry sections come together? How is the meditation on wisdom in chapter 28 to be understood? Who exactly is speaking and when in the third cycle of speeches? What is the purpose of Elihu's speech, and why does he suddenly appear before God speaks and then is not mentioned again? As with any good story, though, our task as readers is to hold in tension our various impressions of Job, God, as well as apparent incongruities in the text, until the whole story is told. For if Job is anything, it is a story whose very ambiguity and tension suggest its meaning. Consider the question that opens the story. Does Job fear God for nothing? In other words, is the motivation to live right and obey God based on a promise of reward and blessing? The question has us hooked, precisely because it articulates one of the thornier issues of faith. But ironically, what really has us hooked is our false presumption that the story will simply answer that question. And for several verses, the prose section lets us think just that. We see Job responding to unimaginable calamity with the words, "Shall we receive good at the hand of God and not receive the bad?" But as the text shifts from prose to poetry, Job shifts as well. And after a week of sitting in ashes and scraping his flesh with a pottery shard, Job is ready to sing a different tune. "Was I born for this?" he cries. "Why is God using me for target practice? Where is justice? Where is God? Why me?" In the cycle of speeches between Job and his friends, it becomes clear that the opening question, "Does Job fear God for nothing?" is no longer the only one on the table. Now Job wants to know why God should be feared at all, if God is indeed so oblivious to injustice. "Know then that God has put me in the wrong. Even when I cry out, 'Violence!' I am not answered. I call aloud, but there is no justice." Job wants to know why God seems indifferent to suffering in the world. From the city the dying groan, and the throat of the wounded cries for help. Yet God pays no attention to their prayer. Job wants God's very sovereignty put on trial. "I desire to argue my case with God. Will you plead the case for God? I know that I will be vindicated." Job's words fly in the face of conventional wisdom offered by his friends. Human beings are born to trouble just as sparks fly upward, they argue. Repeatedly, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar try to convince Job to admit his own guilt and repent of his arrogance. They counsel him to agree with God and be at peace, for surely God is punishing him for some sin. They are steadfast in their insistence that people get what they deserve, and Job is just getting his. For Job's friends, the doctrine of divine retribution is as certain as God's unfathomable wisdom. But Job will have none of it. "Far be it from me to say to you that you are right. Until I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. I will hold fast my righteousness and will not let it go." This is no longer the Job of chapters 1 and 2, the Job who wished he'd never been born. This Job refuses to fly a white flag. Instead, he flings down a gauntlet. And by the end of chapter 31, when Job cries out, "Let the Almighty answer me," we hold our breath. For we, like Job, are more than ready for some answers. For we are like Job. We know that even now, somewhere in our world, a father is burying his children. Somewhere the sea has washed away a village. Somewhere a spouse is being beaten. Somewhere a bomb is exploding. Yes, we know suffering. Yes, we are more than ready for an answer. And an answer does come in chapters 38 through 41. God does respond to Job's plea. But it is not an answer. God responds with a litany of questions and imperatives. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Thunders the Almighty. Gird up your loins like a man. I will question you, and you shall declare to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? What is the meaning of this? Like Job, we've kept up with all the arguments in the story till now. We've seen every angle of Job, pious here, blasphemous there, self-loathing here, self-righteous there. We've listened to the windy words of Job's friends, and truth be told, in their speeches, we have heard our own thoughts echoed back to us. Oh yes, we too have wondered why the righteous suffer and the wicked prosper. We have attributed an earthquake or a plague to God's judgment. Like Job's so-called friends, we have been satisfied to chalk up injustice to the indifference of God. We have harbored the hope that our weekly worship and daily prayers and just good behavior can somehow inoculate us from life's calamities. And yes, like Job and like the psalmist, we have shaken our fist in God's face, demanding God say something. But what God says is not exactly what Job or his friends or we had expected. God's speeches are in the form of rhetorical questions, rich in imagery quite unlike the speeches of Job's friends. Noticeably absent are any mention of God's mighty acts on behalf of Israel. No appeal to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. No rehearsal of the Exodus. In this peculiar theophany, God speaks as creator of the cosmos, sovereign Lord over the silly ostrich and the terrifying Leviathan. In effect, God sings a psalm of praise, sounding a lot like Psalm 104. But what God does not say may be as important as what God does say. God does not say why bad things happen to good people. God does not say why chaos and injustice exist. God does not even condemn Job for anything other than speaking out of ignorance. God does not give Job the satisfaction of an answer. God gives Job the assurance of God's presence. God says essentially, I am God, and I am here. Yes, there is chaos, but there's also order. Yes, there's darkness, but there's also the morning. As at least one scholar has noted, the speeches of God are neither explanation nor condemnation, but revelation. God's response to Job suggests that God embraces Job's questions in all of their ambiguity and defiance, and invites Job to embrace God back, even without any promise of answers. By the end of the story, God's rebuke of the friends suggests that their answers were nowhere near as right as Job's questions. And Job's response? Well, he makes two. His first response is to clap his hand to his mouth, a gesture of humility or one of irony. Whatever it means, Job's signal of withdrawal is not exactly what God was looking for. So God speaks again. This time, Job takes his hand away from his mouth and says, I had heard you with my ears, but now I see you with my eyes. Therefore I recant and relent, being but dust and ashes. Those words are from the Tanakh translation. In chapter 42, verse 6, the word translated in the NRSV as repent is the Hebrew verb nacham, not the typical shuv, which means to return. The Tanakh's translation emphasizes the sense in the text that Job does not so much repent of wrongdoing as he renounces his argument with God. In response to God's appearance, Job does not simply withdraw his complaint. This time, Job is moved with deep pathos to see himself and his God in a new way. As a result, the story concludes with Job's family and fortunes restored twofold, and everyone lives happily ever after. More irony, grace, or intentional dissonance? Perhaps all we can know for sure is that what has ultimately been restored is the relationship between Job and God. And when all is said and done, isn't that what Job and we are looking for?